So without further ado, and I'm trying to keep us on a bit of a strict timeline, mostly it's because I want to keep my kids out of the room while I have a conversation. I am so happy today to invite you to our discussion about reopening Texas's public schools. My name is Joanna Katanak. I'm the Democratic nominee for State House District 108 in Dallas. I am proudly endorsed by AFT. Thank you all so much. I am a public school parent in Dallas ISD. I've been an educator now for the last 11 years. I'm a proud product of public schools. I told Rena this and some others, but I graduated from Blum ISD, which is in Hill County, and I had a graduating class, Rena, of 12 people.
Wow.
In my graduating class. So
small.
That is really small. Rena, do you want me to turn on your video today?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, let's get your video option here. You might have to do it from here.
There.
There you go. We also have Dina Donaldson, who's with AFT. She's going to be joining us to answer any technical questions that we have. But really what I wanted this conversation to be, like we talked about before, Rena, is that it is Monday, June 29th. Last week, the TEA said that it would be issuing sort of guidelines for reopening. Some of those guidelines were found in the form of documents online. Can you sort of talk about where we are as a state of a state? You know, this was issued, we had a discussion last week. How are we reopening our schools? Over the last week, the cases of corona have skyrocketed in Dallas. Yesterday was the highest day.
Yes.
The day before that was the highest day they had ever seen. Hospitals are at capacity in some cases. It is constantly changing. So where is this state right now with regards to reopening?
Well, the last that we heard was that children could return to the campuses. Mm-hmm. It was a district decision as to whether they had to wear masks or not. And so there was a lot of disappointment last week when the updates were supposed to come with specific guidelines and there was no substantive information given at all. The state had a couple of documents that were put out. They said that they were in draft form, but one of the most alarming things to me was that it stated that the state was buying and distributing face masks and gloves and hand sanitizer, I believe, across the Texas school districts. But it was their option whether to use it or not. It was not mandatory. So that gives it makes no sense that they would spend those kind of dollars for the state and then say you don't have to use it. Mm-hmm. That just is nonsensical at all. It's very alarming to me, especially with the state of the positive COVID-19 tests that are coming back and more hospitalizations. People are still experiencing death, and these families are going through trauma. It is a very scary situation for our schools and for students.
Yeah. You know, I think that right now so many parents are in the same boat that I am, where we're sitting here thinking, what is the decision that we can make? But when a district's allowed to make their own decision, you know, what, if any, input? When I was looking at those TEA documents, I couldn't see any input that as parents we could have, except for to petition our boards.
Well, and a very startling thing for me is that I know in Dallas, the teachers who are the absolute ones, the teachers and the staff that are going to be in the campuses, their input has not been sought on the various different plans that we've seen from Dallas ISD. There was a questionnaire in the beginning, but as far as actually what happens, the taking of the temperature, the mask, the face shields, all of that, teachers did not have any kind of input in at all. And so that came from the top administrative level down. which is concerning because parents, all of the stakeholders need to have input for this to be effective and for it to work. If there is not good input and people don't have good buy-in, they are going to be totally afraid to step one foot into those brick and mortar facilities. And so it is changing every day, like you said. I know about 3 to 4 weeks ago, the district put out a per parent survey, and at that time, about 20% of the parents said they were keeping their children home. Well, that was a fairly good indication, but now, as of just this last week, we're up to 50%. And I know that has to do with the number of COVID patients that are now tested positive. So who knows what it's going to look like if it continues to rise, if we don't have some more restrictions put back in place to see what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. You know, I am one of the parents that has not answered the survey yet. And I was sent the survey, and my husband and I have continued to talk about what is the best decision for our family. We are fortunate he is an essential worker, but even his own company's return policy has changed because of the virus, and they are responding as best they can to this. But I think that as a parent, there are some really practical things that I'm concerned about. My little one, my youngest, is expected to go to kindergarten. I cannot keep a mask on that child right now. And those classes have how many kids in there? I mean, with the TA 20, 25?
22. 22 state limit.
22 kindergartners are expected to keep masks on, to not touch another bin all day, eat in a classroom, all have their temperature taken. And this is the assumption that all parents are cooperating at home.
Correct.
If
and
there's
be truthful about where the children have been and where the parents have been.
Yeah. And we're just expected to self-report this. This is just on an honor system that we are self-reporting. And I think that we need to be honest and say that is exactly where we are right now. We are here, the TEA is here, the districts are here, and they are all aware of what is happening. My concern is, who will the districts be listening to, and what guidance will they be taking? Is it from the governor? Is it from the CDC? Is it from Dallas County health officials? Because they're not all on the same page. And that's the troubling part to me as well. I do want to talk a little bit about the unique situation that we have here. House District 108 is Dallas ISD and Highland Park ISD. I want to read to you the Highland Park ISD model. They are offering face-to-face instruction, a hybrid model that allows for as much face-to-face instruction as possible. In particular, they are committed to working with obstacles to have the youngest children and students the most in need of direct services in the district classrooms, as well as providing a high-quality instruction remotely with students and staff who have received training on virtual learning. That is what Highland Park is doing, or that is the current plan. Where is Dallas on their plan?
Well, it's still up in the air. Originally, I believe they were going to do the hybrid model. They were talking about having kids come in for those parents that have to return to work and do not have child care if the daycares don't open. They would need to send their students. But there's not been really any additional planning other than that if we have some at school and some at home, there's no real indication how that's going to happen. Are they going to have just online teachers? Are they going to have just teachers in the buildings? Or will the ones in the buildings be expected to teach online and in class at the same time? Those are two different ways of teaching. So there's not a real definite plan yet because everything keeps changing. I just saw a question in the chat Was there any mention of teachers with underlying conditions, and what are their options? In the survey that the district sent out to the teachers and the support and the staff, it gave them an option to say if they had underlying conditions. And they've received that information. The first survey they sent, there was not a good response. So they did send it out again. I've not heard the results of that, but we don't specifically know the answer to that. They did ask if there were underlying conditions, but what they're going to be able to do about that, we don't know yet. But what we do know is that teachers were offered contracts in May, I believe, April or May. So they are under contract, the ones that signed those contracts. So there has to be some kind of position that they will have for at least another year, because they have 1-year contracts. Now, I'll tell you something that Texas AFT has done. And all of the locals, the AFT locals in Texas, are supportive. We sent a letter to the governor asking him to relax the waiver on the resignation date, because people just do not know with the spike of COVID. The current law says they have to resign by the 45th 45 days before instruction begins. For Dallas, that's July 3rd. So if people are going to retire or resign without any kind of harm done to their certification, that needs to take place. But we've asked the governor, we have asked the governor to waive that, to give some leniency there so that people can make an informed decision about their position, what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. So as far as specific direction to the teachers and staff at the campuses, I'm not aware of any.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we had discussed was what the decision-making process is for the teachers. So if you do say that you are medically fragile, or that your spouse or your child or your mother-in-law who's in the house with you do you have the option of saying, I do not want to choose to teach in person, I want to choose to teach online? I think without us knowing how that's going to happen, it is going to make that difficult. We know that there's an example at TCU where there was a professor whose original contract said he must teach lecture style, which is in the classroom. He had a medically fragile child. He sort of went to the media with this situation that he was under contract to teach one way, but there wasn't an option for not. TCU has since listened and has offered an option to instructors to say, you tell us, do you want to teach lecture or do you want to teach online? And we need to know now so that we can help prepare for that. Is that something that the district should be thinking about as well? Because it is totally different from teaching in class versus online. I have taught both. I have, as a parent, watched my son, my oldest, who is a special ed student, struggled in a traditional Zoom classroom because it was like having a classroom camera on. It wasn't right. The instruction that he got wasn't what he could learn from, and it was a struggle. But I would not say that the teacher was, in all honesty, fairly prepared. No one was. Right. But certainly hadn't been prepared to suddenly be in an online environment. So is there an option right now for teachers to say, I want to be an educator, I love this job, but I cannot risk my health or my family?
In Dallas, the survey that was just put out recently to the teachers and support staff, it did give the option that I just do not feel comfortable returning to the classroom setting. Mm-hmm. So they do have that option to say, I can't go into the classroom, but I can teach online. Mm-hmm. But there would definitely need to be more training on online instruction, how that works and everything. And I believe the district is trying to handle that with professional development for the educators this summer.
Mm-hmm. One of the audience questions we have here is, how will districts ensure all students have effective internet access without cost? I know that's something that we had talked about briefly, Rena. I am from Blum, Texas, which is in Hill County. It was dial up when I was there, and it was barely that. I mean, internet access is such a huge issue in rural communities. It's an issue here. I mean, we are in an urban setting, but so many students do not have adequate internet access. And it's not just you have the internet. Do you have the access that can withhold the bandwidth of having a Zoom class with multiple devices in a home? If you are in an apartment complex with multiple, I mean, it's a challenge. I know the district had talked about investing in infrastructure, which is literally providing the Wi-Fi.
They did. And after spring break, the district diligently bought hundreds of, probably thousands of hotspots to give out to students. They even were able to provide, put hotspots in a bus and take the bus to different neighborhoods that just could not get access. Yes. So they did try that. Now, for the more rural districts in the state, I'm not sure how they would do that if they have the finances to be able to get hotspots for everybody, the bandwidth again. Several months ago, the superintendent said that having bandwidth or having internet in the home is now more like having a utility. It's not optional anymore because you have to have it for the educational process.
I think at this point we have to acknowledge that this is a public utility. Dallas isn't the only one that has done the mobile bus hotspots. They've done this in other school districts in the state where it's literally just a retrofitted bus that's driving around spewing out internet so that people can have access. I mean, that is what they have to do to be realistic about the situation that we're in. I'm glad to see that Dallas is investing in that as well. But another question that I want to get to here is how are teachers being prepared in the classroom? Now, you talked a little bit about some PPE. Will they be provided gloves, masks? Is there any kind of planning for that right now as far as protecting?
In Dallas, yes, they are. They have already spent quite a large sum of money on having enough PPE to go into the schools for staff as well as for students. It'll be in all of the all of the district buildings. They have thought through if they're elevators, how many people can be in the elevator safely, the flow of traffic in one hallway versus another hallway. It has to be, they have tried to think of just about everything, but things that look good on paper do not always make the best practice.
I mean,
it comes down to implementation within the various buildings.
The building that my children attend was built in the 1930s, if not 1920s. I mean, it is on. We have asked and requested bond money to update our school, but the reality is the elevator is so small anyway. There are staircases. The hallways were built in a different era. I don't even understand how this would work, and I'm not being accusatory to the district. I understand how hard this is going to be, but just practically speaking, you're going to get these kids to comply?
Mm-hmm.
And what exactly environment are they in? I mean, the point of school isn't just to learn, and it's not just, it's more than just daycare for parents who are working. I would like my children to enjoy it. And I don't want my little one's kindergarten year to be so restricted that don't touch anyone, don't hug anyone, stay in your line, stay in your classroom, and there be an environment of fear. Is that something?
There is already, yeah. Because it has to be, they know that it's spread airborne. So the masks are vital. Yet we have people still today that don't feel like a mask is necessary. And if they have children in the schools, they may be opposed to them wearing a mask. So someone is going to have to say, okay, let the child in, or I'm sorry, you have to keep your child at home. This is going to be a requirement, and we don't know that yet because the district is still trying to make decisions.
And they're trying to make decisions in an environment that is constantly moving.
Yes.
With a
Every
virus that
day.
mutate, it changes. It's
Yes.
not what we, 3 months ago, I remember them debating whether or not masks were necessary. I remember hearing Anthony Fauci not sure if they were. Now we know this is what we're doing.
Yes.
Um, these are just things we're just thinking about. We have another question here. What if a school district retaliates if a teacher has a child who is medically fragile?
Well, I can tell you in Dallas, the teacher has a contract, and for retaliation, I'm assuming they're saying keeping their child at home or being able to stay at home and teach online. Mm-hmm. There should not be any retaliation. Number one, it's against the law in the state of Texas, but we know it happens every single day in school districts. There is the grievance process, and in order to do anything civilly after that, if an individual does not go through the process that a district has, they cannot go to civil court because they will put it back into the district. You have to exhaust all measures that the district provides. So that would be a level 1, 2, and 3 grievance that would have to be filed. And then if you still did not get the outcome that you're seeking, you could file a lawsuit in civil court, but that would be an additional amount. People can file grievances on their own, or if they're part of an organization, we do that for our members. And so it should not happen, but other things have happened in the past.
Is now a good time for a teacher to join a union?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And please know the differences. Some are unions, some are just associations.
Yes.
And there is a difference. Alliance AFT is the only union that does not represent administrative staff. We feel that that's a conflict of interest. We have what we call a wall-to-wall organization. We help with grievance and legal issues and matters. We have organizing department. We have a professional development department for support staff and for teachers. We're certified through the state, so you can get recertification hours that can apply to your recertification. We have a fabulous retiree chapter. Those that have been in the teaching profession that were members can stay active. We have a very active chapter. We also have a political PAC where we try to get school board members that are friendly to educators and students and parents. Mm-hmm. And so we are very actively involved in what happens. We represent our members. Their job is to take care of students and do their job. They can't always keep up with with everything that's going on. So we try to help them with that. Mm-hmm. We do our very best. We give it 110%. We are successful many times. There's sometimes that we are not, but it isn't because we haven't given it everything. But now is certainly the time to join. Even if you're new in the district, just coming in, you need to have someone that understands what's going on and can help you through these processes or just answer questions.
Yes, so we've put in the chat as well links to join both Alliance AFT and AFT, so that if you are looking for that, or if you have questions, that you please understand that unions have a role, and this is a really important one right now. You are not alone, and that is what union membership is also really helpful for. As the higher education level, many times we are under the association umbrella and not unionization. But even then, there is some protection with regards to legal action if that's necessary. So I want to move on to some questions. We've been answering them in the chat. But there's a question that I have, and it's one that I think a lot of parents have. Um, I don't know if you can answer this fully, Rena, but maybe you can help guide us through it a little bit. If you are a parent sitting right now, what questions would you say they need to be thinking about before they make a decision of whether or not to return their kids to school? What are things that I, as a parent right now, should be thinking about?
What is the district's definite plan on returning to school? What is that going to look like?
Mm-hmm.
If the schools are going to open, how can you assure me that my child is going to be safe?
Mm-hmm.
What protections have you put in place that will help me feel more comfortable if my child steps in the door? If my child rides a bus, what will the bus transportation look like?
Mm-hmm.
If I have a special needs child, how are those extra precautions going to be taken? And there is a lot of consideration for our special needs students.
Mm-hmm.
There are many that have toiletry, I can't get the word out, toiletry needs, where teachers have to physically pick the child up, move them out of a wheelchair or out of a standing box or a chair, that they have to physically help them in those restroom needs. There's feeding tubes in some of our students, being able to help them eat. All of those take one-on-one contact.
Mm-hmm.
How are these individuals, the students and the parents and the staff, going to be protected while those things are happening?
Mm-hmm.
So lots of questions.
Lots of questions. If you were sitting in with administration, and I know you do sometimes, sometimes you speak in front of them as well, what do you think they need to be asking right now that maybe they haven't thought about? I know that they are cognitively aware of what this disease is, of what this virus could do. I know that they have to be aware of the fear with teachers, with administrators, with themselves. I mean, surely they're aware of that. But what should they be asking right now that may be hard questions? I mean, it is hard to say that we won't open the schools. That is a really tough question, but should that be on the table?
Absolutely, in my opinion, it should, especially with just a few weeks before school is supposed to start. What are they going to do? If we listen to the medical experts, I don't think we have an option personally whether to open or not. I think that we really should go online, although we know that is not the best option because there are too many students that don't have access, that don't log in, that don't participate, and they potentially will be left behind. It's very difficult to ensure that every student will be engaged. Even though attempts are made, the phone calls, we've had some teachers go to the homes, and say, I really need you to participate. I care about you. I want you to get your education. But I think for everyone, people just have to ask the question, what are you going to do to be sure we're safe? And the district is very cognitive about knowing safety has to come first and foremost for everyone, not only students, but staff. But I'll tell you, a lot of the staff right now does not feel like they are being given the chance to say, look, I have an elderly parent in my home. I cannot afford to catch this virus and take it home. I have children at home. I have a fragile child at home, a special needs child. There are so many scenarios, and I don't feel like our educators have been given the real opportunity to say, what about you? Mm-hmm. They've not been asked, what about your situation? And they would like to be able to express that in a good way. Say, I am all in, I'm an educator, I want to do this, but for health reasons, for protection, I don't feel like I can go into the classroom, and that has to be considered.
Mm-hmm. Another question that we had that was pre-submitted dealt with STAR. Do we have a clear indication of whether or not that's going to be a consideration for the upcoming school year, or can we take it off the table now?
Well, we would hope that the governor and TEA would certainly take it off the table. This is not a time to be testing kids just in the sake of a test, which some districts use it as a way to evaluate their teachers. It should never be done that way. If there needs to be testing, let it be diagnostic. Let it be used to guide the instruction of the students, but to use it punitively against people and their compensation is wrong. Pay for performance has never worked, not effectively, and I believe that if teachers were able to actually teach content and help the kids learn what they need to learn, we wouldn't see a lot of the turmoil in the education world that we see right now.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they would take another year off of STAR. Let the teachers do their job. Let them evaluate the students, find out if they're getting what's being taught. They're professionals. Let them do their job and be the professionals that they are, and trust them to do that job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we know at the higher ed level as well, universities have already announced that they will not be requiring any kind of admissions testing, SAT or ACT, which is the typical, tests that they would look at in an admissions application. And universities have already begun to say, no, not for the upcoming year.
Right.
And I think that early decision making is certainly relief for students, but, also educators as well. We don't know what the COVID gap is going to be for these kids. I don't think any of us can really see that. As a parent, my son was put into summer school, which was also online, and I sit back sometimes as an educator and say, I understand the need to keep him growing educationally, but I have to look at the social emotional side of this too. And I shouldn't have a kid who cries when they get on or off of Zoom because it's stressful. Some kids, this screen and the maintaining eye contact, especially if you have an autistic child like I do, that is excruciating for them. It is so hard. The other side of his education, though, is that a lot of the behavioral issues that I saw earlier in the school year, I no longer see, because he is not as stressed being in an environment that is all day. His language skills are building because he's with his younger brother.
Yes.
And so for me, a COVID gap might look different. His math may not be where it should be, but his maturity is growing. I mean, it's just really blossoming in that way. And I look at that and go, how would that be measured? Some of our kids may not be participating in school because they're frontline workers. They're stuck in grocery store shelves. They're working a shift at McDonald's because their parents have lost their job. I mean, that's the reality for a lot of the high school kids, that they are frontline workers, and doing history lessons is just not on the table right now because they're trying to put food on the table for the family.
Well, and many of the parents are going through that very thing. A huge question has come up. What about these frontline workers who have younger children but have to be at work? How do they manage having someone to take care of the children if it's all online? If there's more than one child and there's only one device to use, how can they all be engaged at the same time? They can't be. So there are a whole lot of questions that just there are no answers for right now.
I think that's what sometimes the frustrating part is, that everybody is aware that there is no answer because we don't know what we're dealing with. Not really. And how do we make our way through that a little bit? I know we have another question here. about what Richardson ISD might be doing. I'm not as familiar with Richardson ISD. Do you have an idea, Rena?
I really do not. I haven't heard anything that Dr. Stone has put out, their superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
So I will not be helpful that way. I don't know if anyone from Texas AFT has any kind of information, because we do have an associate member program in some of the suburban areas. So they may have something, but I'm not as familiar with our ISD as I am with Dallas.
Mm-hmm. So I've pulled up the Richardson ISD website, and here's what I can tell you. This is just what they're saying online. Richardson plans to offer in-person classes. Richardson plans to offer a virtual school option for families who prefer that choice. So it sounds like they're doing a little bit of what Dallas is doing, and saying here it's one or the other, but not both. And I think that's where a lot of districts are going to end up finding themselves until they get some better feedback on how this is going to look. Has any other organization looked at international models, South Korea in particular? They have their kids going back to school, and I've seen lots of images of planned out school environments. All of the students wear masks. A lot of the learning in other countries as well, has been transitioned outside, not inside of a classroom, but using that outside environment as a way to create space, but also fresh air. Has there been anyone looking at other countries and how they've handled it, as many other countries are further in this than we are? They've been dealing with it longer.
I know that AFT, our national organization, has an international department, and I'm sure that they've been looking at that. I don't have anything current right now that I could share about that, but I know that there has been a look at what others are doing to see what we could learn from them. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Dina or someone else could chime in and give a little more than that. I just know that they are paying very close attention to what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that's what, all of us are looking at that and going, we're not the only state that's going to be returning in the fall. What is New York about to do? What is California going? What is Michigan going to do? And how are they going to be able to handle this? Rena, just a little bit more about the idea of a COVID gap. Is this something whatever gap a kiddo has, that we would be able to work through it? Because maybe what they're getting in the terms of missing out on one section, they're getting in another.
I would like to say yes. They're trying to cover every area possible. I know that not all families have the means to be able to work with possibly a tutor, maybe a high school student helping younger students, or if there's a teacher during the summer that would be willing to work with their children just to try to fill some of those gaps. But it's another question that still there's not a good answer to. Yeah. I know that the district is trying to work through every scenario possible, but even with the higher ups that are working on all of that, there's still going to be gaps. Mm-hmm. And so we have to try to find a way to fill those gaps. We need to be asking our professionals, those that are in the classroom that work with these kids every day. Their voices need to be heard, and their thoughts need to be sought out. Mm-hmm. And to my understanding, that has not happened in an adequate way at all.
Is there anything else you could be comparable to the time that we're facing right now? And I'm asking that because my father passed away years ago, but he was born in the tail end of the Great Depression. He, like a lot of kiddos at that time, you farmed, and that was your option, that was your family, because the situation that you found yourself in rural Michigan, where my family was from, I mean, you had to do what you had to do at the time because the time called for that.
Right.
And I think about, we're not with a wartime situation is a little bit different from what we're dealing with now, but in some ways it's not, because we are having to make choices and putting our family first and putting food on the table first for a lot of folks. Is there any thought to looking at, like, historically, what have we done in other times to get ourselves through this? Because it feels like this is unique, but in some ways it feels like we're echoing times before.
You know, I thought about that not long ago, and I thought, this is like nothing I've ever experienced in my lifetime. You hear stories from the Great Depression, all of that, but our world is different now. Our world thinks differently, acts differently, behaves differently. Our kids today have what I call outside influences that I didn't even have as a child. All of the electronics. I mean, you walk down the street or you're riding in a car and everybody's face is in a phone.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even in the households, for our kids, they'll text you a message on your phone just from their bedroom to wherever you are, rather than having conversations, you know?
This is true.
Dinner time is different. Not everyone sits around a table and has a conversation anymore.
Yeah.
So, you know, for most of us, I don't think we've ever experienced anything to this magnitude that has affected not only our city and our state and our United States, but it's affected the whole world.
Yeah.
And some are faring better because of those decisions, because of the timing. But it's a frightening time, because no one knows, you know.
Yeah. No one knows the prevalence. No one knows if a trip to the grocery store,
if that's going to cause someone to get sick and die in your household.
that's the frightening part. I do remember my family often talked about the Great Depression. My family grew up in Michigan. My grandmother and her sisters, all of them, lost their farm and ended up under the bleachers trying to make a house, like a lot of folks did. That was just the economic downturn hit the country hard, in Michigan especially hard. And I remember very vividly my grandmother's rationing that continued throughout her whole life. And the idea of work first, school later was still something that was just a part of their life. But now I'm raising my boys in this as well, and I'm trying to be realistic about the environment, like you say, we're living in. 6 months ago, we would have had a conversation and said, screen time is bad for kids. Too much screen time is unhealthy. Now we're talking about double, if not triple, and this is the best option that we have. That's the difficult thing that I think a lot of us are facing now. How harmful am I about to make this for my kid? I know that screen time isn't great, but what am I going to do with a kindergartner in a room of 22 kids?
Right.
What is the real reality of that? What is the real reality as an educator being on the other side of that?
Absolutely. It's very frightening. And for those parents that don't have the skills to be able to help their children at home, listen to them read to them, get games that they can play that have skills built in, workbooks, things like that. But many of the parents don't have the means to be able to do that, or the skills. I think it's another hard-hit area are English language learners. You know, having someone that can work with them in both languages, and Spanish is the predominant language, but we have children from all parts of the world that there are like 48 different languages spoken in our school system. Mm-hmm. Just a large number that struggle with the English language because it's not been mastered yet. Mm-hmm. And so there are just so many what ifs. How do we do this? How do we think about that? And it's very difficult to come up with a plan. There's not one size fits all. That
There,
cannot happen.
there
And we
isn't. And
can't attack it that way either.
and I just want to acknowledge for parents who are under a mental load. I mean, the reality is that some days you may be great and things are going good, but there are some days where the sheer anxiety of all of this is hard for a parent to even function,
Right.
let alone having to deal with a child in the home or multiple children in the home. Or in our case, my mother-in-law has been here for months because she has been stuck in the United States because of a lack of flights out of this country. Not everybody wants to have Americans in their country right now.
Right.
And that's, you know, if we could say anything to parents right now, Rena, who are in this position, what would you say to them that would make them feel comfort if they are just unsure and are fearful, or they're worried like I am about the teacher? I don't want my son's teachers to get sick. I don't want this for anyone. This is a deadly virus. What would you say that could be comforting for them, and how they can be even more involved now? I know we've put the links here to email a letter to the governor. What else could they be doing? Should they be calling our school board trustees?
Yes.
Should we be emailing Dr. Hinojosa? What can we do?
Yes. I would say all of those. Certainly the trustees need to hear from you as a parent, trustees, as well as the administration. Send emails to the superintendent or to any of the chiefs. You can get that information off of the website. They're trying to keep the website current as well. But I think just for some relief, you have to decide what is best for your family, your students, and your family, and be okay with that. This is a time of uncertainty for so many people. It has turned our world upside down. But if you're a faith-based person, continue to pray, continue to trust in the Lord. If you're not, whoever your higher power is that you recognize, that relationship is vital in a time like this. But I think when you weigh the options, whatever is best for your family is what is the very best. And if you've got children, talk to them. Talk about their fears. What are their worries? What are their concerns? And express those to trustees and to administration and to the governor. I would also encourage you to trust TEA, Commissioner Mike Morath. Let him hear what the concerns are, because those things are vitally important in the decisions that they make. I can tell you for districts, funding is a huge problem. You know, all of this came about, and the CARES Act that was passed was supposed to help districts take care of some of the expenses for the COVID-19 that hit at the end of school. Well, the state decided they were going to use that differently. That's why there is a huge push for people to encourage your congressmen, your senators, to pass the HEROES Act, which will put money into our districts to help do what we feel like we have to do for our students and our staff during this COVID time. Mm-hmm. So it's essentially important that we do those things. But I think you as a family have to make the best decision for what you feel is right for you, for your family, for your neighbors, your community, and be okay with that.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement. And I know that that's a hard thing to do. Sometimes there is pressure.
Mm-hmm.
especially, I mean, I see it within my own parent groups. There is a pressure
Yes.
that I think that, as a parent, I'm stepping back and I'm being a little bit selfish here. As an educator, I have contracts for the fall. I don't know where they sit right now. I believe that most of our classes will be transitioning online, but I've had lots of training to teach online. It's not new to me, and I feel more comfortable there. And I do wish that some of the educators that were sort of thrown into it had an opportunity to get some training because they were thrown into it
Yeah.
and introduced to Zoom almost overnight. And some of the kids know Zoom a little bit better than the educators.
Right.
And it's they take over because the kids are just really good at this
Well, I
technology.
think very truthfully, our secondary kids are much better at it.
Mhm.
A lot of concern is for our elementary students who have maybe some um, internet activity and some introduction to it, and they're great on the phones and that kind of stuff. But when it comes to academics, it's different. It's
Yeah.
not the gaming situation, although there are educational games that can be done. Um, but it is a different situation, and I really feel like we just have to find the best solution that we can and go with it. Um, but there's so many changing parts every single day that it's become a Herculean task to even think about.
Yeah. One of the things that was a concern for us is that although our kids are familiar with gaming and have iPads, my little one hadn't been taught keyboarding, and they were being asked to type their answers in. They had no keyboarding skills.
Those
They're too
skills.
little to know what that is. One of them was using a laptop that didn't have first of all, he was using a laptop and not a touch screen, and that was just a totally other world for him. And he was trying to learn a new skill on top of learning whatever skill they were teaching that day. And we were watching this in real time going, I never even thought about that you don't know this technology, or
Right?
it's old technology to them. A question that is coming here. I am a school counselor and concerned I'll be used for non-counseling duties such as covering classes. I'm already super busy with counseling students and reviewing transcripts. Is there any word about school counselors or even librarians right now?
I have not heard any in Dallas. I do know that there were many librarians, or quite a few librarians, that their positions were cut because the campus administration decided they needed more administration, an assistant principal, things like that. So many of those librarians, because they are certified teachers, were offered contracts to go back into the classroom. Many of them, it's been 20 years since they've done that,
Mhm.
but at least they were given the opportunity to do that, to try to find librarian positions during this next school year. As far as counselors, my personal thought is that we should have guidance counselors, and we should have social emotional counselors, those that work with the students with their problems, their issues. The guidance counselors would be doing the transcripts, pointing kids to college, filling out those applications, things like that. But that is very costly, and the districts usually don't do that. As
Mhm.
far as the duties are concerned, I don't know that they'll be any different. Depending on how many people return to the buildings, will have um, a huge input into that. Another thing in Dallas, attendance is, you're given 10 days during the year, 5 local and 5 state, but we have some administrators that will hold those absences against you. And so there's got to be some guidance and possibly um, uh, loosening of the policy when it comes to that during this situation. I see
Mhm.
another one, guidelines for pre-K. I've not heard any at all. I think if we go back to the classrooms, they'll be expected to continue as much of the curriculum as possible in the same way that they've done in the past, but with the added responsibilities of keeping the masks on the kids, checking temperatures. I'm not sure how that's going to work. Things like that. And same for our special needs, our special education instructors. Just lots of things to think about.
Yes, in one of our schools, we have PPCD, so we have as young as 3 on the
Yes,
campuses.
yes.
Um,
Well, there's
and
pre-K with
yeah,
three-year-olds, pre-K 4-year-olds, then PPCD, then our daily living skills classes. Those children are bound to wheelchairs, they have feeding tubes, they have all kinds of needs, medical as well as educational. And so just a lot of one-on-one contact for them, and how's that going to look?
hmm So one of the things that we'll be putting online as well is what some of the guidelines that I've seen nationally be put out. This isn't specific to one district, but just what generically the guidelines are. Most of them are right now: maintain social distancing, hand sanitation, masks. I know that there is plexiglass being discussed. My son was in pre-K and DISD. Uh, I don't know where they would have put plexiglass with all those kids. It just
Dallas has
physically.
Dallas has purchased plexiglass. They're supposed to be in the cafeterias for, division there, but in the classrooms as well. And I've heard a couple different scenarios about that, but they have purchased it to go into the classrooms. I don't know the configurations or how they're expected to be used, but it's supposed to help with grouping kids where there's plexiglass between them, and then they can social distance the rest of the students in the classroom.
Yes.
Um,
Has anyone experienced a 4-year-old on these teams in the last 5 years? I mean, I have a test case in my house, so I for me as a parent, I look at some of these guidelines and I think, who's writing these?
right.
I mean, realistically, when's the last time some of these folks have even been in a kindergarten classroom?
And that's why I'm saying the voices of our educators, our teachers, our support staff that are in there, to my understanding, they've not had adequate input at all to think through some of this, which would have been vitally important not only in what's being put out, but also in understanding what needs to happen. Another big concern that we've talked about with our members is, will there be adequate warm water and soap in every restroom in our buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not always been available. And it is critical that our kids have that. They might have water, but is there enough soap?
Mm-hmm.
And that has been an issue in the past.
Gosh, those
So,
are things I didn't even think about. I mean,
and
some of the schools,
someone
if they
has
have
monitored
blowers,
that. Yes,
yeah,
they have blowers to dry the hands.
is
Some
that,
have the paper towels. It depends on what the different campuses have.
I don't envy anybody having to make these decisions, but I will say this. I think it's important that those that are in leadership right now look around the room and see who they have making these decisions, because I will say it boggles my mind sometimes, the people who aren't at the table. Most of the time, that's not women. I'll be honest with you, over and over again. And in just leading the healthcare crisis in Texas, it's almost predominantly men. That's not to say there's anything wrong with that, but there is a place to have differing viewpoints. As a parent, I would feel more comfortable if a member of AFT was in these decision-making processes and not outside of it simply calling to them. But this is a team effort. Everyone has to get buy-in for all of this to work if we're going to get this to work safely. And I wish that everyone understood that a little bit more, that a survey to me isn't enough. I want folks in the room who look like folks in the community. I want the trustees who may be listening to this to look at your own children. Many of them have young children. And I want you to think about how hard it would be to keep a mask on their children in a classroom full of 20 kids, and how frightening that might be for a teacher who has one child sneeze or cough, and the situation that that could create, and have to go back into a work environment over and over again. That's hard. I know, Rena, there are so many teachers who love what they do and who make a difference in these kids' lives. And for their own sake, they may have to not. That's tough to think about. Have you had conversations with teachers at all about that?
Yes. We have many that have those underlying conditions, and they're very afraid, whether it be the age limit, diabetics, asthma, other kinds of medical issues that are extremely scary for them. And are they going to be able to go back into a classroom knowing that the possibility of them contracting the virus from someone else, it would be innocent, but still the fact would remain, would they be able to live through it if they were to contract it? And I think that's a question for everyone, parents for their children. Older children need to be asked their opinions. Our juniors, seniors, our high schoolers, we have some great kids out there. They have good ideas. Let's talk to them and see. Unfortunately, time is of the essence. Dallas is a huge district, and you can't wait till the last minute to make plans. And people know that. But if there's not good buy-in from what's being put out, if people don't feel like their input has been heard or even sought, then it's hard to take in what they're saying, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I didn't have any choice in this, would be the comeback. But for planning purposes, they need to know, where are you with this so we know how to begin school? They do know that school is supposed to start in Dallas on August 17th. Originally, they had a back to school plan to where the central staff would go back into the buildings on July 6th. The district is closed this week for their vacation. July 6th, they go back. But when the COVID in Dallas County started rising again, they pushed that back to August the 4th.
Mm-hmm.
So now they have the option if they want to work in their offices or continue to work remotely.
Yeah.
And many have done that. But every time you enter the building, you have a temperature check, you have to have the mask, the gloves, you have to follow the flow of traffic in the hallways. If you leave for lunch, you have to go through that process again. So is that going to be the same way if visitors come to campus? Are they going to have those precautions built in? How are they going to do social distancing for a bus load of kids? Or will there be 10 kids on a bus because they have to sit every other seat, one to a seat? They've all been sanitized, and they're supposed to be sanitized, the buildings are, but people really aren't very trusting about that.
And and we haven't even talked about any aftercare programs, if that's even an
Correct.
option. I mean, that to a lot of parents right now, myself included, have looked and going, is there an aftercare, or am I supposed to be there 3 o'clock picking them up? And then how do you work with that? If you are going back to work, how does that work?
Right.
So many questions. I appreciate you all for being with us today. We are going to share the links that we have been putting into the chat online as well in a follow-up email. But like Rena said, please contact your administrators and those who are in charge and give them your feedback. Tell them your scenario, because it may resonate, and you may not be the only one who's emailing and telling them. And it sometimes is a cacophony of voices. I did see last week that the state legislature gave a preview of what the legislature might look like. They put plexiglass up between the desks in the legislature. And if we're thinking that far ahead to how our government's going to be functioning in January, I want to see that kind of a detailed plan right now about how we're going to put thousands of kids back into schools in a month. I want to see that kind of plan, and I want to be able to work with you, Rena, and with the Texas AFT, and know that there are people thinking about this. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. I wish we could provide more answers for people, but
Yes.
I think it's important. If we're not asking this, somebody's not asking this, and they're not thinking about this. So thank you all again. We will share the recording of this conversation online later after we've done a little bit of editing to make sure that we've got the audio matched with the video. Thank you again, Rena. Thank you, AFT, who's been answering questions online. Please, please stay safe, you all. Stay involved. We are all going to do our part to keep our students healthy, our teachers healthy. But I'm so glad that we were able to have this kind of a conversation. Thank you, Rena, for joining me today.
Thank you for the invite.
All right, bye-bye.